The crisp, fresh air of the Pacific greeted her the moment she stepped off the plane. A cool, lingering breeze brushed gently against her skin, carrying the scent of rain and distant oceans. New Zealand had always seemed like a mythical place on a map, a destination too far to ever truly reach. But now, after a grueling flight, she was actually standing on her nephew's doorstep, her heavy suitcase gripped tightly in her hand. Taking a deep, stabilizing breath, she raised her hand and knocked twice on the dark wood. Her pulse quickened instantly. It had been nearly a decade since their last face-to-face meeting, and the anxiety of the unknown began to twist in her stomach. Once an energetic, chaotic child who couldn't sit still, he was now a grown man in his early 20s. The front door creaked open with a low groan. He had grown significantly taller than she remembered, forcing her to look up to meet his gaze. His jawline was sharper, his shoulders broader, but the moment his eyes locked onto hers, that familiar, boyish smile broke across his face, melting away years of distance. "Auntie," he beamed, his voice deeper than she had ever heard it. Without waiting another second, he pulled her into a warm, fierce embrace that lifted her slightly off her feet. For a beautiful, fleeting moment, it felt as though time had completely rewound. The comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee, cinnamon, and old parchment books filled the cozy house. As she settled into the plush cushions of the living room couch, wrapping her hands around a steaming cup of herbal tea, they began to exchange stories of the years they had missed. He spoke openly about his long, exhausting working hours, friendships that had slowly faded into nothingness, and personal dreams that now felt incredibly distant and unattainable. His voice faltered, dropping an octave as he confessed to feeling completely stuck in a rut, as if his youth was slipping away and life had lost its rhythm. "You know," she said softly, leaning forward and looking directly into his eyes, "I still remember you as a completely fearless child. You were always running around, chasing after exactly what you wanted without a single care in the world. That brave part of you hasn't vanished. It is still in there, waiting." He smiled genuinely at her words, a flicker of hope crossing his features, but a shadow of doubt still lingered deep in his eyes. As the days blended into one another, a comforting warmth wrapped around the house. It wasn't just from the crackling logs in the fireplace, but from their long, unstructured conversations that easily stretched late into the quiet nights. They cooked dinners side by side in the small kitchen, laughed until their stomachs hurt over cherished family memories, and found a rare, peaceful solace in each other's company. She couldn't help but notice how incredibly attentive he had become. He didn't just listen, he truly heard her, remembering tiny details about her preferences and past that she herself had long forgotten. One breathtaking evening, they sat together on the wooden porch steps, silently watching the sky turn into a vibrant canvas of gold, crimson, and deep purple. "You always believed in me," he murmured into the twilight, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Even during the times when I completely failed to believe in myself." She smiled back, a wave of affection washing over her. Her visit was originally supposed to be a short, temporary getaway, but with each passing day, the thought of saying goodbye and packing her bags became harder to bear. There was something deeply grounding, steady, comforting, and unexpectedly tender about his presence. Yet, beneath that surface warmth, she began to sense a subtle shift in the air. Sometimes, his gaze would linger on her face just a little longer than usual. His words to her seemed softer, his physical presence felt closer, and the boundaries of their dynamic felt blurred. She quickly brushed the thought away, dismissing it as a foolish trick of her own imagination. One night, she sat entirely alone in the dimly lit living room, an open book resting forgotten on her lap. The house was silent, but her mind was a chaotic storm. Their recent conversations replayed in a continuous loop in her head, his easy smile, his quiet admiration, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred deep within her chest, something complex that she didn't quite understand or want to label. "Stop overthinking this," she whispered harshly to herself, closing her eyes tightly. "You are just family. That is all this is." But deep down, in the absolute quiet of the night, she found she couldn't ignore the persistent, quiet whisper of her own restless heart. The next morning, she woke up early to the soft, rhythmic clinking of dishes originating from the kitchen. Her nephew was already up, quietly preparing a fresh breakfast. He greeted her with a bright, welcoming smile the moment she walked in, placing a perfectly arranged plate of golden toast and eggs in front of her. "You really didn't have to do all this," she said, genuinely touched by the sweet gesture. "I thought you deserved a real break for once," he replied, his eyes locked onto hers as he sat down across from her. At first, they ate in a comfortable silence, listening to the morning birds outside, but soon their conversation picked up right where it had left off. He opened up even further about his inner struggles, feeling entirely overwhelmed by the corporate pressure at work, the transient nature of relationships that never seemed to last, and the heavy, suffocating weight of societal expectations pressing down on his shoulders. "I just don't know if I'm doing anything right anymore," he admitted honestly, his voice dropping so low it was barely louder than a breath. Feeling a sudden surge of empathy, she reached entirely across the table and gently, reassuringly squeezed his hand. "You are surviving, and you are doing so much better than you give yourself credit for." His eyes softened instantly at her touch, and for a tense, split second, an intense, unspoken warmth passed between them. Realizing the weight of the moment, she quickly withdrew her hand, cleared her throat nervously, and looked away. In the days that followed, their bond only grew stronger and more undeniable. They spent their afternoons exploring the winding, nearby nature trails, sharing forgotten stories from their pasts. He recalled vivid memories from his childhood, how he used to count down the days until she would visit, how she always brought his favorite sweets, and how her beautifully written letters had once been his absolute lifeline during tough times. "You were always there for me, no matter how far away you were," he said one clear evening as they sat outside on a blanket, gazing up at the endless, star-filled night sky. "Even when I didn't say it out loud, I really, truly appreciated you." His words lingered heavily in the night air, awakening a strange longing inside her. She began to consciously notice things she had blindly overlooked before, the deep warmth in his voice that made her feel incredibly safe, and the specific way his smile could effortlessly light up an entire room. She tried to quickly dismiss these dangerous thoughts, constantly lecturing herself that they were bound by blood. But reality was becoming far more complicated than logic. One rainy evening, they were watching an old movie together, curled up closely under a shared blanket on the couch. Halfway through the film, he shifted slightly and gently rested his head against her shoulder. She froze instantly, her breath catching in her throat, but she didn't pull away. The comforting weight of him, the quiet, steady sound of his breathing right next to her ear. It was also strangely, intoxicatingly comforting. As the final credits rolled across the screen, she shifted slightly, her heartbeat uneven and erratic. I should go to bed," she murmured, breaking the spell. "Yeah," he replied softly, his voice much quieter and more hesitant than usual, though he didn't move away immediately. That night, she lay completely awake for hours, staring blankly up at the dark ceiling. Her mind was entirely stuck on that single moment on the couch, the overwhelming warmth of his presence, and the terrifying way her heart seemed to completely skip a beat when he touched her. She knew with absolute certainty that she shouldn't be feeling this way, but something stubborn inside her soul refused to let the feeling go. The next morning, driven by a sudden panic, she tried her best to artificially distance herself, purposely spending more time alone in her room or reading outside. "It's the right thing to do. It's the only thing to do," she repeatedly told herself like a mantra. But logic failed every single time their eyes met across a room. The exact same warmth returned, unspoken, heavy, yet completely undeniable. One quiet afternoon, she stood silently by the kitchen window, watching him work outside in the yard. He was diligently fixing a broken section of the garden fence, his sleeves rolled up, completely focused and invested in the physical task. She stood there, hidden by the curtain, and realized she could no longer deny the truth to herself: she was deeply drawn to him. The sudden weight of this realization caught her completely off guard, leaving her feeling profoundly confused, guilty, and shaken to her core. "Get a grip on yourself," she muttered fiercely under her breath, turning away from the window. But no matter how hard she fought her own mind, the emotions kept rushing back like a tidal wave, leaving her painfully torn between what her heart secretly craved and what she knew was fundamentally right. The brilliant, golden afternoon sunlight poured generously through the kitchen windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air as she stood by the counter, completely lost in her own thoughts. She aggressively kept herself busy wiping down already clean surfaces, endlessly rearranging the dishes in the cupboard, doing absolutely anything to occupy her hyperactive mind. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, her thoughts always drifted right back to him, the cadence of his voice, the warmth of his smile, and the undeniable way he filled the entire room just by existing in it. She poured herself a fresh cup of hot tea, wrapping both of her hands tightly around the ceramic mug, desperately hoping the physical warmth would somehow calm her restless, anxious mind. The sudden, sharp sound of the front door clicking open made her entire body tense up instantly. She turned around slowly, just as he stepped inside the house, wiping sweat from his forehead. I didn't hear you come in," she said, her voice accidentally sounding a bit sharper and more defensive than she had intended. "Sorry about that," he chuckled softly, offering a tired but warm smile. "I definitely didn't mean to sneak up on you." His eyes fell away from her face, landing on the mug in her hands. "Is that tea?" "Yes," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. "I can easily make you a cup if you want." She turned her back to him, facing the kettle and forcing her breathing to stay perfectly calm and measured. She heard his footsteps approach. He stepped closer, closing the distance until he was standing directly behind her, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him. The air between them instantly shifted, becoming thick, heavy, and charged with everything they weren't saying. "You're incredibly quiet today," he noted softly, his voice brushing against the back of her neck. "I was just thinking," she murmured, staring fixedly at the kettle. Terrified of what might happen if she turned around.